The city didn't see him, not the rushing faces, not the glowing lights. Just another street kid, forgotten on the edges of the world, fighting for one more day. But then, the silence of the night was broken. A faint sound, almost a whisper, and there, beneath the freezing rain, pressed against a filthy wall, a little girl, small, blind, shivering alone in the dark. He didn't know who she was, didn't know how much that lost child meant to someone, didn't know who, somewhere out there, in the city's shadows, would give anything to find her, but even starving, even freezing. He reached out his hand, not for a reward, not for hope, but for something many had already lost, compassion. And in that moment, with that simple act, his destiny began to shift. Because as he carried that girl for miles through the darkness, powerful, eyes were already watching from afar. Without knowing it, his quiet act was about to cross paths with a billionaire, and what happened next would change both of their lives forever. If this story touches you even in these first few seconds, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Kindness still exists. Stay with us, because the most powerful twist is yet to come. Downtown pulsed like a living machine. Bright lights, fast steps, honking horns, but it wasn't alive for people like him. For Malik, the city was a cold giant that didn't care whether he was there or not, 16 years old. Thin hood pulled, low clothes patched together from charity bins and forgotten corners. His sneakers barely clung to the soles, and his thin frame moved like he was part of the shadows themselves. He'd learned how to disappear in plain sight, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Every night was a new survival game. Dumpster behind the Vietnamese bakery on Jefferson, that was tonight's mission. If he was lucky, maybe some bread hadn't spoiled. If not, well, hunger wasn't new to him. He crouched behind the rusted dumpster, lifting the lid carefully, making sure the security camera above didn't catch his face. There it was, a small loaf, still wrapped, only slightly damp on one corner. A small victory. He grabbed it quickly, tucking it under his arm, and that's when he heard it, a sound, faint, like a breath caught between sobs. Malik froze. His instincts sharpened immediately. Years on the street had taught him how fast danger could creep. He turned his head, scanning the darkness behind a stack of discarded cardboard, and there, tucked into the corner, nearly invisible, was her, a small girl. 7, maybe 8, her dress torn and dirty, scratches across her arms and knees, matted curls clinging to her damp skin. But what struck him most were her eyes. They didn't move, didn't focus, didn't see, blind. She didn't flinch as he slowly stepped closer. "Hey," Malik said softly, his voice steady but gentle. No answer. He knelt down, lowering his voice even further. "You okay?" Her head turned toward his voice, but her clouded eyes stared past him. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracking. Malik felt something tighten in his chest. "Well, maybe we're not strangers anymore," he said carefully. "I'm Malik." She didn't answer. Her tiny fingers clutched a piece of broken cardboard like it was a shield. He glanced at her scraped feet, bare, swollen, red from the cold. "Are you hungry?" he asked. After a moment, she nodded. "Barely." Malik hesitated only a second. He reached into his backpack, the same bag that carried everything he owned, and pulled out the only real food he had, a small turkey sandwich, still warm earlier when a church volunteer had handed it to him. He had been saving it. Now, without thinking, he carefully unwrapped it and held it out to her. She sniffed it cautiously, her tiny hands trembling as she accepted it. The way she bit into the sandwich broke something inside him. She didn't devour it. She savored it, like she wasn't sure if it would disappear. "What's your name?" he asked softly. Ava. That's a nice name. She gave a small nod and kept eating. They sat there for a long time. Neither of them spoke. The city roared around them, loud, busy, indifferent. But in that narrow alley, for the first time in a long time, Malik didn't feel so invisible. He'd found someone even more lost than he was. And for the first time, survival didn't feel so lonely. The rain came heavier as the hours passed, cold needles slicing through the alley, dripping through the patchwork tarp Malik had pulled over their heads. Ava had fallen asleep, curled up on an old hoodie Malik folded into a makeshift pillow, her tiny hands still gripping the edge of the thin blanket like she feared it might vanish. Malik sat beside her, his back against the cinder block wall, arms crossed tight across his chest to fight off the chill. His hoodie was soaked. His jeans clung to his legs like wet rags, but he barely noticed. His eyes stayed locked on the fragile girl beside him. He had seen plenty of suffering. He had lived it, but something about Ava cut through him in a way nothing else had. Not because she was blind, not because she was lost, but because she trusted him. Blind trust. In a world that had given them every reason to trust no one. Every so often, she'd stir. Her small voice would break the silence. "You're still here?" "Yeah," Malik would whisper. "I'm still here." He wasn't going anywhere. The hours dragged. Wind howled through the gaps. His body ached, legs cramping, back stiff, but he forced himself to stay awake because she was still breathing. And that was his responsibility now. In that tiny shelter of tarps, cardboard and rusted metal, something unspoken passed between them, a bond neither of them had ever asked for, but both of them needed. Around 3 a.m., Ava shifted again, her voice even softer this time. "Do you think my daddy's looking for me?" Malik swallowed hard. He didn't know how to answer. "I hope so," he said gently. She was quiet for a moment. "I miss him. I don't know how I got lost. I just remember voices, and then nothing." Malik's stomach turned. Whatever had happened to her, it hadn't been simple. This wasn't just a child who wandered off, but he didn't press. She wasn't ready, and maybe neither was he. Instead, he reached for a small story, a way to soothe her as the rain beat harder against the thin roof. "Do you want to hear a story?" he asked. She nodded, barely perceptible. "Once there was a girl who couldn't see with her eyes," he began, keeping his voice calm, slow. But she could hear everything, the wind, the trees, the sound of people's hearts, and because she could hear all that, she was never truly lost. Ava breathed slower, steady now. And one day, Malik continued, she met someone who could hear too. Not like her, but enough to know how to keep her safe. She was asleep again before he finished. Malik leaned his head back, eyes blinking into the leaking seams of the tarp above him. His stomach growled, the cold bit deeper into his skin. But none of it mattered right now, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving for himself. He was protecting someone, and he wouldn't let her down. The rain hadn't stopped by sunrise. It softened for a while, then returned, soaking the city streets in waves. Grey clouds hung low like a heavy curtain pulled over the skyline. Malik hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time his eyes closed, his mind flashed back to Ava's face, the way she clutched the blanket, the cracks in her voice when she whispered about her father. She trusted him. That meant something. As the first light crept through the gaps in the tarp, Malik knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The city would wake soon. Noise, people, authorities, and eventually someone who would ask questions. Questions he wasn't ready to answer. He gently tapped her shoulder. "Hey, Ava, time to wake up?" Her eyelids fluttered open, confusion at first, then recognition. "We're still here?" "Yeah," Malik whispered. "But we need to move." She sat up slowly, rubbing her hands together under the oversized hoodie he had given her. Malik hesitated, then knelt down in front of her. "Your feet. They're not going to make it far. Let me carry you." She frowned. "Won't it hurt you?" He shook his head. "Nope. Hop on." Ava climbed onto his back, her arms wrapping tightly around his shoulders, her tiny fingers locking into his jacket. Her head rested lightly against his neck. Malik adjusted her weight, stood up, and stepped out into the rain. He didn't know where exactly they were going, but he knew where to start. The laundromat. The day before, he had caught a glimpse of a news broadcast inside, the missing girl alert, her face, her name, the West End Park. That was his only clue. It was miles away, at least 10, and he would walk every inch of it if he had to. He cut through alleyways, side streets, anywhere that kept them off the main roads. People didn't ask questions in these parts, but uniforms did, and Malik couldn't risk anyone stopping them now. Every few blocks, he'd pause to shift her weight, making sure she was still breathing. Steady against his back. "You okay back there?" he asked more than once. A tired voice would answer, "Yeah, just tired." So was he, but he kept walking. His soaked sneakers slapped against the wet concrete, one step at a time. The hole in his right shoe had widened so much that his sock was soaked straight through, squishing with every step. His hands trembled, but he kept gripping her legs tightly, refusing to let her slip. He passed closed storefronts, empty bus stops, graffiti-covered walls. The city didn't even glance at them. They were invisible, a thin, soaking wet boy carrying a fragile blind girl on his back. And still, no one stopped. That part didn't surprise Malik. He was used to being unseen. By the 4th mile, the rain came harder. His arms ached, his knees burned, but he pushed forward. By the 6th mile, the sidewalks grew wider, the buildings taller, the neighborhoods cleaner. It was a different world now. Lawn sprinklers, quiet streets, gated driveways. Wealth, a world that had never belonged to Malik. By mile 9, the mansion appeared. The tall iron gates, the glowing windows, exactly like the image he saw on the news. He stopped just outside, catching his breath, his chest heaving, his legs shook beneath Ava's weight. But he made it. He finally made it. Malik stepped up to the security box. Heart pounding, he pressed the button. Silence. Then a voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes?" Malik swallowed. I found her. Ava. I found Ava." The line went dead for a moment. Then the gates creaked open, and with shaking legs, Malik carried Ava through. The rain struck harder as Malik approached the tall iron gates, his breath coming out in harsh, shallow bursts. His legs trembled beneath Ava's weight, and every step felt heavier than the last. But he kept going, his sneakers soaked through, squishing with each movement, his hoodie plastered against his back like a second skin. The mansion stood ahead of him like something from a world he didn't belong to. 3 stories of glass and stone glowing warmly behind the rain. Massive pillars framed the front door, and golden lights spilled from tall windows like soft invitations to a life that could never be his. Malik stopped at the gate and stared up at the call box. His chest heaved. His hand hovered for a second before pressing the button. The speaker crackled to life. "Yes?" His voice caught in his throat. He swallowed hard. I found her. Ava. I have Ava." There was a pause on the other end, only the static of the rain filling the gap. Then a faint click. The heavy iron gates slowly groaned open. Malik exhaled and took the first step forward, feeling like his entire body might give out. But he kept walking, every muscle in his body screaming at him to stop. He adjusted Ava's small frame on his back as she clung to him, her breathing light, almost sleeping. The long driveway curved in silence. No one came out to meet him until he reached the wide stone steps leading up to the door. That's when it all happened at once. The front doors burst open. A man appeared first, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark, tailored suit. His hair was slicked back, but his face was pale, his sharp grey eyes wide, searching, frantic. Behind him, a woman stumbled forward, wrapped in a silk housecoat, her face streaked with tears, her breath trembling as she gasped Ava's name. The moment Ava sensed their presence, she stirred and whispered softly into the rain-soaked air. "Daddy!" Her father's face collapsed into relief. He dropped to his knees on the marble steps, his arms open wide as if he might collapse himself. "My baby," his voice cracked. "My sweet baby." Malik lowered himself to one knee, finally releasing Ava from his exhausted arms. His muscles burned as he gently shifted her onto the dry marble. She wobbled slightly, but her father caught her instantly, wrapping her in trembling arms. The woman, her mother, was already beside them, her hands frantically running through Ava's. Wet curls, pressing kisses to her cheeks, whispering apologies, gratitude, disbelief. They clung to Ava as if she might vanish again if they ever let go. Malik stood still for a moment, his breath rattling in his chest, watching a family reunite. A family that wasn't his. Nobody looked at him. Nobody asked who he was. Nobody saw the boy who had carried her through the rain, and for Malik that was fine. He was used to being invisible. With no words spoken, he turned and started to walk back into the rain, his back hunched, his head down. The gates behind him slowly creaked shut, closing with a dull finality that seemed to echo in his bones. The lights from the mansion blurred behind the falling rain until they disappeared completely. Malik didn't look back. He never did. The rain didn't stop as Malik made his way back toward downtown. His body moved almost on autopilot, every muscle throbbing with fatigue. The cold had settled deep into his bones, and each gust of wind sliced through his soaked hoodie like tiny needles. His shoes squelched with every step, the soles worn thin from miles of walking. But even as exhaustion screamed in his limbs, his mind stayed oddly clear. She was safe. That was all that mattered. He whispered those words to himself, like a quiet prayer, as if repeating them could dull the ache inside his chest. He had done something good, something right, and even if no one had seen him, even if no one ever knew, that was enough. At least that's what he told himself. By the time he reached the city's outskirts again, the streets were nearly empty, save for a few late-night stragglers hurrying to get out of the rain. Headlights flashed by as taxis splashed through puddles, but no one paid him any attention. That was Malik's gift, moving through the world unseen. He finally ducked beneath the awning of an old bus stop, its plastic roof barely offering any shelter from the cold drizzle. The wind still sliced through, but at least here the rain didn't. Hammer directly on his head. His knees buckled as he sat, leaning against the cold plexiglass wall. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his thin arms tightly around them. His breath came in shallow puffs, fogging in the frigid air. The plastic tarp he had used to shield Ava was gone. His hoodie clung heavy and wet to his skin, offering little warmth. His hands trembled as he pulled the hood tighter around his face, trying to trap what little heat he had left. He coughed, a deep, rattling cough that scraped against his throat. But he forced it down. Rest, that's all he needed. Just a few minutes. Then he would figure out his next move, maybe head to the church near the overpass. Sometimes they left bags of food out early, maybe find dry clothes, anything to get warm. Again, he closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the sharp, damp air. For a brief second, his mind drifted back to that house, to the warmth spilling out onto the marble steps, to Ava's parents, sobbing, grateful, desperate, to a world that would never belong to someone like him. He shook the thought away. That wasn't his life. It never would be. What Malik didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly imagined, was that inside that mansion, things were already shifting, questions were being asked, security footage was being reviewed, and a man, the billionaire father, who had knelt in the rain, clutching his daughter, wasn't willing to simply let the boy who had saved his child disappear into the cold night. Not this time. Inside the mansion, as the rain continued tapping against the wide windows, Nathan Karile stood in front of the large security monitor. His jaw was clenched, his sharp grey eyes narrowing as the footage replayed again and again. The gate camera showed the boy, skinny, soaked to the bone, lowering Ava gently to the ground. He didn't hesitate. He didn't demand anything. No words, no questions, just a quiet release like he was setting down something precious and fragile, and then he simply turned and walked away. Nathan's hand hovered over the pause button, freezing the frame as the boy's silhouette disappeared into the shadows beyond the gates. Even through the grainy, rain-drenched footage, Nathan could see the boy's body trembling from exhaustion. But his steps never faltered. He didn't even wait for us to say his name, Julia whispered softly from the corner of the room. She stood there clutching a cup of untouched tea, her knuckles white around the porcelain. Her face was still, pale from the ordeal, but her eyes followed the frozen image on the screen. No reward, no attention, she added, her voice breaking slightly. He just left. Nathan didn't answer right away. His mind was racing. In his world, the world of billion-dollar deals, corporate power plays, and ruthless efficiency, kindness was currency that rarely existed without an agenda. Everything had a cost. Every action, every favor, every alliance. That was how his empire had been built. But this boy, he'd stepped out of the shadows carrying his daughter through a storm, without hesitation, without expectation, and vanished back into the same darkness as if he never existed. Nathan exhaled sharply. "I want to find him," he finally said, his voice low but absolute. Julia looked up, startled. "Nathan, not for charity," he added quickly, "not out of guilt, but because people like that." He trailed off for a moment, watching the rain streak across the windows like falling silver threads. "People like that don't belong on the streets, not anymore." Julia hesitated, then nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He saved our daughter." Nathan turned to Paul, his personal assistant, who stood quietly behind him. "Pull the footage from every traffic camera within a 10-mile radius," Nathan ordered. "Street cams, storefronts, every security feed you can tap into. I want his face. I want a trail. I don't care how much it costs or how long it takes." "Yes, sir," Paul replied, already pulling out his tablet. Nathan's voice dropped even lower. "And Paul, be discreet." Paul nodded again, understanding perfectly. In Nathan Karile's world, discretion wasn't a suggestion, it was law. As the tech teams began their quiet search, Nathan stared one last time at the frozen image of the boy. His mind wasn't just calculating anymore, it was haunted. This wasn't just about finding a lost kid. This was personal. Because Nathan knew power when he saw it, and sometimes true power came disguised as humility. The city was waking up again. The rain had finally eased into a faint drizzle, leaving the streets slick and glistening beneath the early morning light. The hum of engines, the distant chatter of commuters, the metallic squeak of buses pulling into their stops. All the usual noise had returned, but Malik barely heard any of it. He sat curled against the wall of a boarded-up storefront, the bus stop's thin plastic awning barely shielding him from the cold mist that still clung to the air. His head hung forward, chin resting against his chest. His eyelids were heavy, his body limp from exhaustion, but his mind refused to shut down completely. Every muscle ached, every breath stung. But his heart was lighter than it had felt in a long time. Ava was safe. That was enough. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. He didn't hear the car pull up, didn't hear the door open, didn't even notice the footsteps at first, until a shadow blocked out part of the grey light in front of him. Slowly, Malik blinked his heavy eyes. open, and for the first time he saw him. The man standing in front of him wasn't like anyone who usually walked these streets. He was sharply dressed, his long dark coat immaculate despite the rain, his polished shoes reflecting the wet concrete, his eyes cool, steady, unreadable, locked directly onto Malik's. Malik instinctively straightened up, his body tensing. "I'm not stealing," he said quickly, voice hoarse, defensive. "I know," the man answered softly. Malik's breath caught. The voice was familiar, calm, firm, controlled. The man crouched down to eye level, but his movements were deliberate, measured, not like a cop or a social worker, but like someone who wanted to speak, not intimidate. "You walked 10 miles. In the rain," the man said, his voice low. "You carried my daughter on your back. You gave her your only food. And then you vanished." Malik froze. His pulse quickened. This was Ava's father. He was face to face with the billionaire. Nathan's gaze softened, but only slightly. "She told me everything. What you did, what you gave up. She remembers every step." Malik swallowed hard, unsure what to say. His instinct screamed at him to get up, to walk away before this man offered him something he couldn't afford to. "Except I wasn't looking for anything," Malik finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want her to be alone." Nathan nodded slowly, studying him carefully, like a man evaluating something rare. "I know that too." He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver thermos, unscrewed the lid. Steam curled. "Into the air. Hot tea," he offered. "I figured you could use it." Malik hesitated. His fingers trembled as he reached for the thermos. The warmth spread through his hands almost instantly, and as he took a careful sip, the heat burned his throat. But it was the good kind of burn, the kind that reminded him he was still here. Nathan remained crouched beside him, silent for a long moment. Then he spoke again. "My daughter is safe because of you," he said. "You owe me nothing, but now I owe you something." Malik shook his head. "I don't need anything." Nathan's voice lowered, steady as stone. "Maybe. Not, but I'm offering it anyway." Then with quiet authority he extended his hand. "Come with me." Malik stared at the hand for a long moment. It didn't feel real. It couldn't be real. People like him didn't get offers like this. Not here, not in this city, not in his world. But Nathan's hand didn't waver. His eyes stayed locked on Malik's. Not with pity, but with something far more dangerous. Respect. And that's what made Malik finally move. His trembling hand rose and met Nathan's. The man's grip was firm but steady, pulling him gently up from the cold ground, like lifting something fragile out of the wreckage. As Malik stood on shaking legs, Nathan gave him a slight nod. "No more alleys," he said quietly. "Not for you." The black luxury car waited at the curb. Nathan opened the door himself, gesturing for Malik to step inside. Hesitating for just a second, Malik looked one last time at the broken sidewalk, the graffiti-covered storefronts, the makeshift home he had known for years. And then he stepped into the car, into a different world. The drive was quiet, no small talk, no empty words. Nathan simply watched him with that same intense calm, as though studying a puzzle he was determined to solve. Malik stared out the window, watching the streets blur by, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at him. But for the first time, his mind allowed something else to creep in. Hope. The mansion loomed ahead, its wide iron gates swinging open as they approached. Malik's breath caught in his throat. It was even bigger than he remembered from the night before. The car rolled to a stop beneath the grand stone archway. The front door opened. Julia stood there waiting, and behind her, Ava. She ran toward them the moment she saw him, her tiny arms outstretched. "Malik!" she cried, voice breaking into a wide smile. He barely had time to react before her arms wrapped around his waist. She clung to him like he was a lifeline. the same way she had wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her through the rain. "You came back," she whispered. Malik swallowed the tight lump in his throat. "I told you I wouldn't leave. You remember?" Julia's eyes glistened. She stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Nathan stood behind them, watching the scene in silence. Then finally he spoke. "You saved my daughter's life, Malik, but you also reminded me of something I had forgotten." Malik turned. Nathan's voice grew firmer, like the beginning of a new contract. "You belong here." Malik blinked, stunned. "What do you mean?" Nathan took a slow breath. "A home, education, a future. Whatever you need, and not as charity, as family." Malik's voice trembled. "Family, yes." Nathan's words cut through the air like a promise. Because family isn't always about blood. A tear escaped down Malik's cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it quickly, but Julia caught his hand gently. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. And standing there, on that grand porch beneath the soft glow of the mansion lights, with Ava's tiny hand gripping his and two people who saw him for who he truly was, Malik finally believed it. For the first time in his life, he belonged.